As you get closer to your destination, more and more monsters begin to gather around. Some people stare at Kajuro and don't understand why he's here. The vampire accompanies Kazuro along the way, and around there are only more hungry glances wanting to taste the boy's flesh. One monster comes closer and asks the guy why he's walking so calmly with the monsters. Will he really be the main dish on the table? The monster joked. Kazuro, without being at a loss, invites the monster to try his hand and give his opinion about the main dish. The monster tensed a little and looked at the hand with a hungry gaze. Sensing a strong aura from the guy, he jumped away, just like the vampire. Realizing that something was wrong with the boy, he decided not to come close and go further away. Kajuro was again surprised that no one wanted to attack him. Seeing the bright light, Kazuro turns his attention to a beautifully decorated house located deep in the forest. Dozens of monsters converged on him. The vampire remembers that Kajuro was not alone when they fought, and asks where the plump bun that was with him when they first met. Kazuro replies to the vampire that he had some plans for Po, to which the vampire says that he must be very tasty, and Kazuro retorts by saying that he sleeps in a trash can and smells disgusting. The vampire began to laugh loudly at Kazuro's words and pull him along. Tsuyuki and her brother looked at the joyful vampire and Kazuro and were surprised at such a relationship. It all looked somehow suspicious, Tsuyuki said. There were dozens of monsters around, heading into one building, and Kazuro was walking there, accompanied by a high-level monster. Fen was confused and didn't understand what was happening. Yui suggested staying calm and sticking to the surveillance plan. We need to figure out how to get inside the building and find out where Kazuro was taken. Taking out 3 magic stones from their pockets with the ability to hide their identity, they planned to enter the building and reconnoiter the situation. After looking at the stones and then at each other, Fen agrees and accepts the stone first. The task that the head of the Devourers entrusted to them was very important, and it was impossible to fail. Throwing a stone into himself, Fen began to feel changes in power and waited for the result. Tsuyuki also made up her mind and threw a stone into her mouth. Walking inside, Kazuro notices a huge line of monsters bringing donations and gifts to their mistress. Kazuro suggested to the vampire that he present it as a gift. Finally, the vampire's turn has come, and he offers a living guy as a gift, trying to behave naturally. Kazuro, on the contrary, shows absolute calm and joy. The recipient of the gifts asks his colleague to take Kajuro to the room where he will be handed over to the main one. Such a gift from a vampire is very valuable, said the butler. Pushing the boy into the gift room, they closed the door and continued to do their work. The room was ordinary and even decorated, reminiscent of a person's home. Kazuro begins to look around the room and hears everyone in the next room making noise and rejoicing. The guy begins to think that he is at some kind of monster drinking party. Kajuro starts kicking things around in anger. He needs to quickly test his monster swordsman and save Hanami. But here he doesn't understand what's going on. Red Eye senses a strong monster at the top and suggests to Kajuro that he should act faster, and there was no time to wait until he was brought to the main one. Seeing the window, Kajuro decides to open the window and climb out through it. While the monsters are hanging out and drinking, they definitely won't notice him. While Kajuro was trying to quietly climb out of the window, 2 little maids were already watching him. They were surprised by the guy's action, because he was getting into a crowd of monsters, and he was also a human. Jumping out of the window, Kazuro begins to run upstairs, running through the crowd of monsters, trying not to attract attention. 2 maids again stand behind him and watch what the boy is doing. The girls had never seen such zeal among the mistress's guests, but they had never seen friends among people either. Approaching a large room at the top, Kajuro looked around and immediately decided to go inside. Opening the doors, Kajuro notices a girl sitting at the end of the room with her head covered. Her body looked like a goddess, and her dress was a little vulgar and short. Kazuro decided, without losing his head and time, to approach the monster. The girl felt the presence of someone strong with the help of her strength. The room was dark, as it was intended for a loving couple. The pleasant voice of the monster girl was a little embarrassing, as was her appearance. Kazuro, a little shyly, came closer to ask to fight him. Raising the veil, Kazuro is convinced of the beauty of the beautiful monster. She is a little embarrassed by such quick eagerness that she does not notice who lifted her veil. Kajuro begins to apologize for disturbing the beauty and ask to kill him, smiling with all his teeth with joy. Seeing that some impudent boy, and not even a monster, had lifted her veil, she became very angry. According to old traditions, the one who raised the veil should be the husband. Kazuro apparently did not know such a custom. Kazuro was glad that she was very angry, which means she could kill him and end the torment of mastering the sword monster. The bride monster calms down and makes a very strange decision, which leaves Kajuro shocked. She approaches the boy and hugs him, resting her body and embarrassed. She agrees to marry the guy. Kazuro was very embarrassed and surprised at the same time by such tenderness. Kazuro begins to get scared and frees himself from the bride's embrace. He was looking for death from a powerful monster, not life together in marriage. The bride monster behaves very seductively and wants to quickly start the newlyweds' first wedding night. Kazuro, frightened that everything is not going as he would like, begins to run away, trying to get to the exit. The bride uses her magic with the words that the boy will not leave the room until she receives what she has not experienced for so long. The doors closed with a loud slam. There was little chance of salvation. Kazuro felt fear from inexperience and the realization that the monster wanted to sleep with him. Pressed against the door out of fear, Kazuro began to beg to let him go or kill him, but he would not marry. He was still young and irresponsible in relationships, since they had never existed. Kajuro's tense face spoke of fear of what was to come. He wishes with all his heart that he would rather die than make love with a monster, even one so beautiful. Kazuro began to run from the beautiful bride around the table with various goodies. The bride behaved very playfully and allowed slight weakness in front of the boy without using force. From such runs and the guy's cries for salvation, he only turned her on more and made her fall in love with him. The girl, smiling, was just waiting for the moment to grab him and drag him into bed. Red Eye watched what was happening. It was very funny to him that the boy was so unlucky and no one could kill him. He only ended up in surrendered situations, such as this one. Kajuro begins to ask his eyes for help. Red Eye says he will try and starts making jokes about the beauty in the wedding dress. The girl was already starting to get tired of catching up, and the jokes of the Red Eye were no longer necessary. Red Eye with a smile began to tell the boy that he was worrying so much in vain, but he would have something to tell his friends. And at the same time, the first time will be truly unforgettable, the Red Eye teased. Tired of pathetic attempts to stall for time, the girl decided to act more seriously and end this whole performance. Jumping up, she decided to grab the guy and throw him to the ground. Then he will not be able to resist the bride's strength and break free. Here, he will be doomed. Having thrown the boy face down, she pinned him to the floor and began to scold him for taking so long with foreplay. "Let's do the main thing now," the bride said. Turning Kajuro onto his back, she began to take off his jacket in order to quickly lie down. Kajuro could not escape and was very embarrassed. He wanted to cry and screamed, begging for help. Meanwhile, the groom whom the bride had chosen was already approaching the bride's chambers. Guests stood around and congratulated him on the holiday. At the entrance to the bride's chambers, her maids stood and greeted the groom. Having opened the doors, the groom sees the bride lying with some guy on the floor and hugging. Kajuro notices a huge monster and begins to rejoice that now he can definitely be killed. To celebrate, Kazuro begins to push the bride away, accidentally grabbing her by the chest. He tells the groom that he came to the bride's chambers and decided to have fun with her, having first removed the veil, pointing his finger at his neck and hinting that he should quickly kill such an insolent person. Kajuro was already hoping that everything would work out and the plan for the death and testing of the swordsman would begin to come true. Seeing the groom's huge cleaver, Kazuro approached and, touching the wooden handle, began to ask the groom to quickly deal with it. The monster begins to laugh heartily, holding his stomach. Kajuro doesn't understand what's going on and starts to get nervous. Along the way, taking off the groom's clothes and putting them on Kazuro, the monster with a huge cleaver laughed with happiness. Kazuro begins to realize that something is wrong here. The groom's clothes and the monster's laughter, and no aggression towards him. Having thrown off the last headdress of the groom, the monster began to rejoice that now he was free and did not have to get married. Kazuro was amazed that even monsters are not always ready for a serious relationship. Kajuro looked at the leaving monster laughing with happiness and was shocked. The boy clearly did not expect this. Now he had no chance of salvation. He didn't understand why this happened. What could make monsters suddenly treat humans so well? No one even tried to bite him. The bride, sitting down on the bed, began to call the boy to her in a gentle voice and reassure him that everything was just beginning. Their whole life was still in front of them. Such words only made Kajuro more frightened. He stood near the exit and decided to try his last chance to get out and save himself. Using control magic, the bride directs her hair towards Kazuro in order to grab and tie the guy. The hair begins to envelop the guy's arms and legs, preventing him from moving. Just before leaving, she manages to grab Kajuro. Screaming at the closing door and begging for help, he reached out with his hand towards the exit. But the door was closing, and everything was already a foregone conclusion. Meanwhile, 3 guys who were chasing Kajuro enter the monster palace. Having used the stones to hide their power, they felt like they belonged among the monsters. They needed to find Kajuro and find out why he came here. Walking into the ceremony hall, Yui noticed that the vampire Kazuro had come with was sitting at the table. He sat with some monsters and drank. Yui decides that they should not attract attention and sit down next to the vampire and ask him where Kajuro was taken. Brother Fez and Sister Suyuki are a little nervous, but they agree with Yui and follow her. Noticing that there are 3 empty seats near the vampire, the guys begin to sit next to him. The vampire notices that 3 guys who don't look much like monsters sit down next to him. The vampire suspected something and asked where they were from. Fen, a little shyly, said that they came from another city. They had mutual acquaintances from the groom's side. The vampire thought that they were very hungry from the road. Having placed a piece of human intestines with gravy on Fen's plate, the vampire invited them to try such a delicacy, especially since they were probably hungry from the road and would not refuse to try such an exquisite treat. Fen immediately almost burned with disgust. He could barely restrain himself from vomiting. With this look, he would betray the boys and expose them to a crowd of enemies. The monsters sat and began to suspect something was wrong. Yui notices that everyone has started to look at them in surprise and suspects that they are not monsters, unless they prove otherwise. Yui puts her hand under the table and begins to pinch Fen so that he would pay attention to her faster. Covering her face with her hand, Yui begins to hint to Fen that he should not give them away and quickly start eating the intestine with a big smile, or his career in absorbers will be over. Realizing that he is at stake, Fen begins to throw intestines into his mouth with both hands and says how delicious it is. Gravy runs down his hands. From the gaze of the monsters, the girls also began to try treats from the human body and, trying not to show their disgust, ate with a smile. Suddenly, a strong cry of joy is heard. Everyone turns their attention to the stairs from the 2nd floor, along which a huge monster was descending, rejoicing and laughing. Everyone was surprised, since he was supposed to be the groom. Everyone started asking what happened. The monster begins to say that there was some little man who decided to take our beauty as his wife of his own free will. He saved me from death, said the huge monster. Everyone began to congratulate the huge monster with the cleaver and be happy for him. He did not become a victim of family fuss and remained a normal slacker. The guys, chewing on tasty pieces of human organs, felt bad enough. But when they heard that some guy would become a husband and this was a man, they immediately realized that we were talking about Kajuro. The vampire also realized that Kazuro would become the husband of the monster bride and was a little surprised. But he will get what he craved so much, the vampire said. Yui noticed that the vampire was thinking and asked him what happened to his companion along the way and why is everyone talking about a certain person. A vampire, realizing that they are not local and do not know their main history. He decided to tell them a story. Once upon a time, during the time of the Great Rebuilding, there lived a beauty. Her parents decided to marry her to a rich man, but at the wedding, someone poisoned him. Everyone thought that the bride did this, since she did not want to marry the first person she met, but only for love. Her family also thought so, and beat their daughter severely. They almost lost their heads for such an act of their child, and they had to give up all their property in order to survive. One day, When the girl was completely tired of the constant beatings of her parents, she dressed in a wedding dress and hanged herself. The parents were frightened by what they saw, but were not sorry. After death, she became a great and strong monster bride, and her only desire was to marry for love. But most monsters refused to marry, but that was no longer important. She was able to force anyone with her power. The problem was not the wedding itself, but the fact that every husband the day after the wedding looked as if he had dried up and was dying. No one knew how the bride sucked out their life energy. The vampire said that the boy who came with him was the bride's new husband. But don't worry, he will die anyway, and she will have to look for a new groom. Fen was terribly surprised that Kazuro decided to do this. If he wanted to experience new experiences in life, then for this there was no need to stick to a monster. The vampire, smiling, notices that Fen is also attractive and invites him to play the role of groom for their bride next time. Fen was scared because he didn't want to die and tried to refrain from answering, a little afraid. Fen hoped that Kazuro himself would be able to cope with the monster bride, and no one would have to die anymore. It's better to let him suffer. It will be revenge for the defeat in the arena and the loss of 2 monsters, Fen thought. The look of a slightly mentally unstable person and cold sweat enveloped Fen's body just from the thought that he would have to sleep with a monster. Tsuyuki, hearing that Kazuro will end, invites Yue to leave this place, realizing that he will not survive, and they must return to the university. Yui, hearing the proposal, thinks that we'll probably do that, but only if Kajuro really dies here. Yui looks at Tsuyuki and replies that she agrees to go, but only Nada makes sure that Kajuro does not return. Unfortunately, they won't be able to check since the room is locked and there are too many monsters around. One could only hope. Waking up after a long night, Kazuro felt very tired and weak in his body. He didn't understand what happened and why everything hurt. With force, he stood up and noticed that without clothes, a beauty was nearby and hugged the guy, asking him not to get up as he looked very tired. She invited him to rest a little more while she prepared him breakfast. Kazuro, brushing aside the attention of the monster bride, tries to get out of bed and find his things. The girl, continuing to cast her magic on the guy, tries to put him to sleep and force him to stay nearby. Hinting to the boy that he was on top and the night turned out to be very cheerful, she wanted him to stay, and they would continue to do family business together. Dressed and refusing any proposal from the bride, Kajuro tries to pack up and leave. His eyes showed apprehension and fatigue, but he felt no fear. He only wanted death. The bride said he was looking for death just so he could become a monster and live with her forever. Kazuro, through tears, replies that he will never live with a monster in his life, and he still needs to finish university and find a job before settling into family life. Having gotten dressed, Kazuro got ready to leave, simultaneously asking the bride not to stop him since he had to study. The girl lay in bed, continuing to inspire with her magic thoughts and desires for the boy so that he would return. Passing by the mirror, he notices that he has lost a lot of weight and is weak. Apparently, she is somehow able to fuel her strength by sucking the life juices out of others, Kazuro thought. Realizing this, Kazuro began to worry that he would not last long with her and would die. The girl, covering her sexy body with a silk blanket, approached the boy and said that he was the only one who lived until the morning. Kazuro was horrified by what he heard. Hugging the boy, she told him in his ear that he was the only one she loved and wanted to live with him all her life, simultaneously using the magic of winding. Kazuro, inhaling vapors of invisible power, unconsciously tries to resist the magic and get away. Showing her feelings and attitude towards the boy, she reaches out to kiss him. Kajuro tries with all his might to prevent her from doing this. Kajuro decides to try to find out through cunning about the monster that can kill him, so that they can always be together. The beauty replied that no one could kill the guy on her territory, but there was a place. In one forest, not far from them, there is a very strong monster, capable of doing what the guy wants. Having heard the information, Kazuro decided to clarify where exactly and where to go. The girl says that there is a forest in the west, where he will find that monster. Having heard everything that interested the guy, he gathered the remnants of his strength and rushed out of the room along the way, almost knocking over the mistress's maid. The maid, with a delivery and a cup of tea, sees the boy running again and asking the lady if she should intervene. Embarrassed with happiness, the bride replies that there is no need to worry. The boy himself will want to return to her. She was confident in her words and looked very happy. Having run through the forest and finally arriving at his room, Kazuro, dying of fatigue, grabs the handle to open the door. Opening the door, behind which Khan with his cleaver swung in a jump to attack. Kajuro was surprised and too tired that he thought it was already the end. Having barely managed to stop the blade near Kazuro's neck, Han was surprised. Kajuro broke out in a cold sweat from fear and did not understand what was happening and why Han attacked him. Han said with a surprised face that he thought there was a monster behind the door. Kajuro's aura was somehow corrupted and looked like a monster. Having woken up from the noise, he draws attention to the very tired Kajuro and asks what happened and where he was all night. Kajuro replies that he was carrying out the director's instructions and cannot say. Feeling very tired that his eyes were getting dark and his head was spinning, Kazuro said that he felt bad and he needed to stay at home. Climbing out onto his bed, Kazuro tries not to fall and go to bed, saying at the same time that he won't go to class today, and asked him to tell the director that he was sick. Han began to suspect that Kajuro had gotten into something bad. His aura was corrupted by the monster's aura, and it was very strange. The power of the shadow monster made it possible to evaluate the enemy's aura, and Kajuro's was very weak. First lesson in class, everyone is having fun and comes to the classroom to take their seats before the lesson. 3 exchange students, after a night of shadowing Kajuro, were very tired and sleepy, and when they went to class, they lay down on their desks and fell asleep. The weather was sunny outside, and the warm rays warmed everyone in the class. Before class, Sarah enters the freshman's office in search of Kajuro, whom she has not seen since yesterday. She was a little worried, because she knew that after his conversation with the director, he had run away somewhere. When he saw Sarah, he ran up to greet her and wish her a good day. He was a little nervous because he liked her very much, but he understood that his chances were slim. Sarah asked him if he had seen Kajuro, since yesterday he ran away somewhere after school. Poe said that Kajuro came back this morning very tired and exhausted. He had never seen him like this. The spy school children heard Poe's words that the boy had survived and were very surprised. Was Kajuro able to survive what that vampire told them? Fen said. Tsuyuki looked at her brother and couldn't believe it either. Apparently it is not as simple as it seems at first glance, said Tsuyuki. Meanwhile, Kazuro came to the infirmary, asking for some restorative medicine, yawning profusely and suffering from body aches. The doctor looked at the boy and advised him to devote more time to sleep and study, rather than an active and exhausting life while studying. Kazuro agreed with the doctor, but he still received the pills and with great desire began to immediately throw several into himself for a greater and faster effect. Yui and her brother and sister Lin walked past the doctor's office and saw a guy. He stood near the door and greedily ate the pills without leaving. Having thrown in the pills, Kazuro collected his thoughts and came to visit Hanami in the individual therapy room. He chewed on her behalf and wanted to tell her how much he missed her. Entering the room, Hanami was sitting on the bed and was already conscious. Kajuro was very happy, but realizing that she was still weak, he did not dare to touch her. He calmly sat down on a chair next to her bed and began a conversation. Hanami said that she woke up this morning. Kajuro acted a little confused and was glad that Hanami's condition was gradually improving. He wanted to tell her so much, but didn't know where to start and was a little lost. Hanami began to reassure the boy with the words that she had received worse wounds in her life and always got out of trouble. She was very pleased that he was so worried about her and embarrassed her a little. Hanami began to ask the boy what happened during the period while she was unconscious. What happened in the tomb before he passed out? Did he find something important there? And what was that radiance of enormous proportions? Kajuro said that she asked so many questions that he didn't even know how to answer. When he woke up, he was told that Hanami was seriously injured and they didn't know if she could survive. Kazuro was very worried and wanted to go to Director Lin to pick up the antidote for the bite of his wolf monsters. Hanami felt embarrassed hearing that the boy was ready to do such an act for her sake. Hanami asked, "What about that glow and why did he fall unconscious with a scared face?" She was also very worried then and did not understand what was happening. Hoping to save the guy, she almost died herself. Kajuro began to reassure Hanami with the words that everything worked out thanks to Director Sota. He said that inside Kazuro, there was a sword monster with a very powerful force, which caused the state of fainting. Kazuro was not ready for such power, and his body did not obey. But the director was able to extract excess energy and return the boy to his condition. Hanami was very glad that everything worked out, and the condition of both of them began to improve. She was very pleased to spend time with Kazuro, and when he touched her hand, promising never to leave her and put her in danger again, she blushed deeply and realized that she had fallen in love, but she remembered that she needed to check on her mother. But Hanami's condition was still very weak. Kazuro suggested that he go and visit her mother himself, so that she would not worry about her daughter. Meanwhile, Yui and her brother and sister Lin were watching. They wanted to eavesdrop on the conversation and find out what happened in the tomb and who opened it. Trying not to attract attention, they stood neatly at the corners of the door and listened to Hanami's conversation with Kajuro. Yui began to notice that the girl on the bed looked very much like her, and her heart began to beat faster when she looked at her. She didn't understand how this was possible, and why something incomprehensible was happening inside her. Suddenly the doll monster began to crawl out of the body and reach out to the girl on the bed, making eerie sounds of sadness. Yui was surprised by this, and understood that she had to hide it quickly, otherwise they would hear them. Yui began to suspect that the girl on the bed might know something about her life, since even the monster recognized that girl. Yui was a little worried that maybe Kajuro was in the library then, and was not saying rude things, but facts about the family. After talking with Hanami, Kazuro went to the hospital to visit Hanami's mother. The weather outside was warm and sunny. The hospital where Hanami's mother was hospitalized was not cheap, but they had no choice, because only there were specialists who could help Hanami's mother. Having walked along the corridors and ascended to the desired floor, Kazuro opens the doors and, a little shyly, greets Hanami's mother and introduces himself as her best friend, Kazuro. Mom was shocked and behaved very strangely. She did not expect that someone other than her daughter, a good person, would be able to come to her. Her eyes expressed concern and surprise, and the cold sweat on her face indicated fear of being in danger. She jumped out of bed in her pajamas and, unable to resist, began to kneel out of weakness and lean on her hand. Kajuro never expected this and hurried to help the woman and ask why she did it. Lifting the woman up, Kazuro sees that she has begun to cry and says that she is very glad that her daughter has a friend. She was afraid that because of her sick mother, her daughter would never be able to live a normal life and would always be alone. Kazuro was very surprised and said that they met under not very pleasant circumstances, but soon became very close and became friends. Mom asked the guy why her daughter didn't come, to which Kazuro replied that she didn't need to worry. Everything was fine with her daughter. She just had a bad fall and was now in the hospital. Mom was very scared and worried. She wanted to leave the hospital as quickly as possible and be next to her smart girl. Kazuro began to stop the woman, saying that if she disconnected from the machine and left the clinic, she might worsen her condition and would definitely not be able to meet her daughter. Trying not to scare Hanami's mother, Kazuro tried to reason with the woman not to do anything stupid and would wait until her daughter felt better and she herself came to visit her mother. Hanami sent him to prevent her mother from doing anything stupid. "So don't scare your daughter," Kajuro said, reducing his ambition a little, realizing that he spoke too harshly. Kazuro begins to apologize and politely ask the woman not to do something for which she would be ashamed in front of her daughter. As they helped Hanami's mom to her bed and laid her down, they started talking about their parents. Mom asked Kajuro where his parents were, to which Kazuro said that they are farmers and work on a farm far from the city. They used to live in the city, but wanted to move and change their activities. Kazuro stayed because he needed to go and make a career for himself. Kazuro recalled that as a child she often walked with her mother outside the city, but much of her memory had already been forgotten, even though it was not so long ago. And my father was often not at home and returned late because of work. That's why they wanted to move to be together. The woman listened to the boy and said that his parents were very wise if they decided to make such changes and left this damned city. There are too many people here who can destroy everything that is so dear to you. Kajuro listened and remembered Hanami's story, how a man ruined their lives and brought their mother to such a state. Adjusting the blanket and making the woman more comfortable, he remembered that he would never forget or forgive the act of that man and would take revenge for Hanami and her mother. Hanami's mother looked at Kajuro and saw in him the hope that her daughter's life would be much better and was glad that there was a chance to one day see a happy daughter before her death. Kazuro sat opposite and, feeling the tense situation, decided to somehow influence the conversation in a positive direction. Starting to take out the fruit from the bag that he brought to Hanami's mother, he began to peel the apple and tell funny stories from their university life. Trying to cheer up Hanami's mother, Kajuro said that he lives with a boy who slept in a trash can all night and smelled terribly. Smiling and laughing, Kazuro holds out his hand holding an apple to treat the mumu and thank her for the time spent with her and for the beautiful daughter who became his best friend. She looked at him, and it seemed to her that he was familiar to her, but without saying anything, she simply took the apple and thanked the boy for the sincere and cheerful conversation. She had surprise and suspicion on her face, but trying to hide her guesses. She decided to turn away. Kazuro managed to notice a strange expression on his face and wanted to ask if something was wrong or if he should bring something, to which the woman said that there was nothing wrong and thanked the guy again. She looked thoughtful and tried to remember where she knew the boy's face from. Having decided to rest, she asked the boy to leave since she needed to rest, and she was very tired. Turning to the side of the window, she began to cover herself with a blanket and pretend that she wanted to sleep. Kajuro was a little surprised, but realizing that it was not easy for her now, he agreed to leave. Having said goodbye and wished her a good day and get well soon, Kazuro, realizing that she was hiding something and knew, decided to leave the room. Approaching the door, the thought did not leave him that she might know something that would help him learn more about the absorbers and their main thing. Meanwhile, Yui stood at the hospital reception and wrote a message about where she was and what she had learned. Having followed Kajuro and learned that he had come to visit some woman, Kento Aragak, the head of the absorbers, having heard which hospital Kazuro had come to, immediately guessed who he was coming to. He was filled with abnormal joy that now he could interrogate his ex-wife and find out something interesting about the boy and how he knew her. Having written to her daughter that she would be there soon, Yui stood in the hall and waited. Suddenly she notices Kajuro, who left the ward and went to the elevator to go down and leave the hospital. Kazuro stood near the elevator and waited for the doors to open. He decided to call his father, since he would soon arrive by train from the village where they work as farmers and grow corn and nuts. Having reached him, Kazuro asked his father when the train would arrive to meet him and left the hospital. Kento arrived shortly after the boy left. He forcefully opened the doors without hesitation and immediately began asking his ex-wife questions about the boy and why he came here. He was very aggressive and strict. One look scared everyone he interrogated. Seeing Kento, the woman got very scared and started screaming at him to leave her alone. Her eyes began to water from worry, and knowing what this man was capable of, she began to scream for help. He grabbed her by the pajamas, not afraid of anything, and began to threaten her that if she didn't tell anything, then she would definitely not survive. He looked at the frightened woman and did not feel a drop of pity. He only wanted to find out information that would help figure out who Kajuro was and who his parents were. Hanami's mother knew that she would not survive and that he would get her anyway, and without an ounce of respect, she tried in every possible way to remain silent and not say anything to Kento. After a lot of insults and disrespect, the woman spat in the face of the head of the absorbers and said that she would never tell him anything. It was unexpected for Kento that such a weak and stupid woman would do such a thing. She looked proudly and a little fearfully at the angry Kento, feeling a little pleasure. Her weak body was unable to fight back, so she did this. Kento was very proud, and no one dared to do this to him. His impudence and arrogance would not leave it so easily. Without keeping her waiting long, he threw the woman onto the floor, smiling with all his might and pointing her to her place. She hit the floor. It hurt her a lot, but she couldn't fight back. Realizing that now he would only mock her and continue to beat her, she tried to at least tuck her legs and arms in order to group herself and prevent her from damaging her internal organs while screaming for help. Receiving kicks in the chest area, she experienced severe pain, but did not give up and did not say anything to Kento about the boy. She pretended that she didn't understand what he was talking about. If he so wanted to harm his ex again, then why not kill him right away and not mock him like the last scum, Hanami's mom said. He took pleasure in beating women. He felt sincere pleasure when he beat his ex and threatened that he would kill her if she did not tell why Kazuro came here. A look full of anger wanted to achieve what he wanted by any means possible, and nothing would stand in his way. Experiencing severe pain all over her body and trying to hold on, she refused to tell him anything. For all the pain he caused her and her daughter, he should be in prison, not in power. People like him only destroy people and don't care about anyone except themselves, the woman said. Leaning closer to her, the head of the absorbers grabbed her by the hair behind her head and began to lift the already badly beaten woman. He did not feel any regret for his actions and only wanted to find out what he needed to know. He continued to demand that she tell him everything she knew about the guy and screamed while beating her. Behind him, his daughter Yui entered the room and saw her father beating the unfortunate woman. She was shocked and did not understand what was happening. Kento, hearing his daughter's voice, immediately changed his face and was surprised why she came here and didn't stay downstairs. He didn't know what to say or how to explain the situation. Hanami stood at the entrance without moving, trying to digest everything she saw. Yui began to ask her father why he was beating an unfamiliar woman, and how he even dared to do such a thing. She is very disappointed in her father's behavior because she has never seen him like this. He was always kind and friendly in front of her. The father began to make excuses, saying that she was a criminal covering up for her accomplices. She doesn't want to open them, and so she has to use force. Bandits are very dangerous and have harmed many people, and they must be stopped. Standing up and walking towards his daughter, he said that it was true and began to apologize for his actions to her. Yui was no longer sure that her father was telling the truth. She remembers him always being kind, but here it is, which completely changes everything she thought about him. The woman behind introduces herself to Yui as her ex-wife, who was robbed and beaten by her father and now has to live in a hospital and eat only pills. This man is very cruel and two-faced. They are kept in power, the woman said, sighing in pain. The head of Kento immediately began shouting at her to shut her mouth and not lie. Everything that this woman said was not true, and he never knew her, continuing to lie to his daughter. Kento was already on the verge of failure and saw distrust in his daughter's eyes. Yui, hearing the woman's words, began to cry, realizing that this was most likely true, and began to run away in tears and complete disappointment in her father. Kento wanted to catch up with his daughter, but she was against it and did not want to see him. The head was very disappointed that his daughter saw him like this, but it was already impossible to fix it. After many blows and herbs, the woman sat on the floor holding her stomach and leaning on the bed, laughing with Kento that he was so two-faced and hid all his sins from his daughter. Kento stood and looked at his daughter running away down the corridor and was very disappointed, but the matter had to be completed. Meanwhile, Kajuro had already approached the station and was expecting his father to appear. His train arrived at the station 2 minutes ago, and his father should already be near the exit. Kazuro notices a strangely dressed man with a yoke and, looking closer, sees his father in him. Starting to wave his hand to attract attention, Kajuro welcomes his father to his arrival. The father notices his son and rejoicingly approaches him, holding the yoke on his shoulders. The father was very happy to finally see his son after a long break. He arrived with 2 buckets of nuts and words of congratulations on entering the university and starting a new adult life. Kajuro was pleased, but he was a little surprised to see so many nuts, but thanked his father. The father, wiping the sweat from his face, began to show pride in Kazuro, saying that he was the only one in the family who entered the University of Absorbers and would become the most glorious and powerful of them. Kajuro, smiling, begins to ask why he decided to come and why only one. The father replies that he just wanted to check on his son, and the mother stayed on the farm with her daughter, who is still sick, but is slowly getting better. Kazuro is glad that everything is fine with them and suggests they go for a walk. Taking a bucket of nuts, Kazuro and his father told each other interesting stories that happened in their lives, smiled, and had fun. Dad looked like he was just from the field, but it made his body look more toned, and his muscles were visible. Leaving the station, the father begins to notice how many interesting things have appeared in the city, how polite and kind everyone is. In the few years he was out of town, so much had changed. Kazuro said that people really became kinder, but not everywhere. Paying attention to the large and lovely beauties around, the father became a little embarrassed. Kajuro looked at him and was a little surprised and thought that even his father looks at attractive girls. Then maybe this is normal. Deciding to remind my father that my mother was clearly more beautiful than the girl who passed by, my father became embarrassed and agreed with Kazuro. Having told your son that you can watch, the main thing is that your beloved does not find out about it. Otherwise, you will be in trouble. Having reached the nearest cafe, Kazuro suggested stopping and having a snack, and at the same time learning more about their life in the village. The father agreed because he was already tired and wanted to drink a glass of water. Walking inside, they were greeted by a waiter wiping the table. He suggested that they choose a place to land, since it was only daytime outside, and there weren't many people there. The father immediately asked to bring a glass of water to their table, and the waiter agreed. Having sat down at the table, my father immediately began to drink a glass of water and enjoyed every sip, since it was quite hot outside. The waiter came up to them to take their order and politely began asking what the guys wanted to try. Behind the father, the door was slightly open, from behind which a beggar came out and asked the waiter for some food. He entered the establishment with his bowl and asked for at least some crumbs of food, otherwise he would not survive. I haven't eaten anything for a very long time. A pitiful and skinny face spoke of the poor condition of the greenhouse. The waiter did not listen to the guy and asked him to leave and not interfere. He now has too few people to give alms and treat the homeless man. Kazuro notices that the boy has no hands and decides to take a closer look. He realizes that this is his classmate, who helped escape from the absorbers on the night the tomb was opened, and immediately rises to greet his comrade. He had not seen them for a long time, and did not know what happened to them after the discovery. A classmate, hearing Kazuro's voice, raises his head and sees him. He was very glad to find out that the boy survived, but his condition was now much worse. Kazuro immediately called him to the table and asked the waiter to bring hot food to his friend. The boy attacked the food and ate greedily, smacking both cheeks. He had not eaten for so long that he was afraid to die because no one wanted to help him. The father watched Kajuro feed the homeless man and smilingly asked where they met. While the boys were eating, the father looked at the boys and was glad that Kajuro grew up to be kind and generous in helping others. "Did you really meet in a trash bin?" the father asked. Kajuro looked at his father in bewilderment, feeling ashamed in front of his classmate, and said that this was his classmate. They studied at school together. After the exam, he lost his arm and wanted to commit suicide, but my friend Hanami saved him by taking him in. And in general, he helped save my life when they dragged me from the tomb, Kazuro said. The father felt awkward and apologized to the boy without an arm, showing his regret and thanking him for saving his son. Kazuro watched as his comrade greedily ate the dish, that he was afraid for the others, and thought that he should ask for the others where they were and what had happened when he passed out. Having filled his belly with delicious food, the classmate thanked Kajuro. Afterwards, Kazuro asked him what happened to the rest of the guys and where did they all go. The boy, wiping his mouth, asks who this man is next to him, and is it possible to discuss this in front of him? Kajuro apologizes for not introducing his father earlier and introduces them. He was worried about the others, that even such an ordinary incident was forgotten in his head. A classmate greeted Kazuro's father, and realizing that there was nothing to hide, decided to reveal what they had seen. His face changed from smiling to frowning. He began to say that when they decided to distract the guards so that Hanami would drag away the unconscious Kazuro, there were too many opponents, and a terrible thing happened. Just before the exit, near the point of their gathering, the jock was attacked and captured. Since the absorbers grabbed him, they would definitely interrogate him. We were nearby, but we couldn't do anything because it was scary. Such a guy will last a long time and will not reveal all the secrets of our team. But everyone has a chapel. The head of the absorbers is very cruel and is capable of extracting information from anyone. So we need to save the guy if possible. Kazuro, looking completely confident and calm, agrees with the words of his classmate to pull the jock out to freedom. But to do this, he needs to find out where he is being held and how to get there. The father looked at his son and was surprised that the once very modest and cowardly man suddenly became so fearless. Kazuro was thinking out loud and thinking about how to rescue his comrade. He suggested talking with Hanami and getting them all together for further actions. The father listened to his son talk about saving his comrade and was a little surprised, realizing that this was very dangerous, but he did not try to dissuade him. Kazuro asks his father to go back to the village, since it is very dangerous for them here. Given that the absorbers are interested in Kazuro, his father agreed to go back. But this was not true, just like the fact that he is a farmer. After having lunch together and having a heartfelt conversation with their father, they said goodbye and went home. Kazuro was very happy to see his father, but circumstances force him to save his comrade. The father was also glad to see his son, and realizing how he had matured and become more independent and decisive in action, was proud of him. Kazuro and his classmate walked towards the dorm carrying heavy buckets of nuts. The father, in turn, realizing how dangerous it is to get involved with the Absorber Bureau, decides to help and save the prisoner without putting his son in danger. Lowering his head and covering it with his hat, Kazuro's father walked to the main entrance of the Absorber's office. He was very serious and ready to put an end to them, since they did not give a quiet life to his family. What he was doing was quite dangerous and secret. Approaching the entrance, there were 2 guards standing in front of him who were stern and did not let anyone through. They saw a man dressed as a farmer approaching them and tried to stop him by saying that there was no way through. The boy's father, still not raising his head, approaches and prepares to hurt them very much. Hearing the banal ways of the guards to stop the man, the father smiled, doubting their competence, and raised his head and opened his face, lifting his hat, taking out the magic box from his pocket. The father, without saying anything, activates a powerful artifact and begins to pull monsters out of the absorbers. Unfortunately for the enemy, such an artifact can kill, depriving the bearer of the monster. Feeling intense pain from the loss of the monster's soul, the guards fall to the ground unconscious. The father, without raising his head, walks by holding an artifact in his hand, which is a very dangerous weapon against any absorber. The guards fell to the ground, their bodies did not move. The father passed, and his robe fluttered in the wind. He knew that there were many cameras around, and it was better not to take off his hat so as not to harm his family. Under the setting sun, the father climbed the stairs and prepared to enter the station to find Comrade Kazuro and save him from the hands of the damned Bureau of Absorbers. Despite their appearance, the absorbers had no idea that the most wanted man had come to them. Entering the corridor, where there were many absorbers and they were all fussing, as there were many robots to capture various criminals. One of the absorbers notices a suspicious man entering without security escort. Holding a folder with documents, she decides to approach and ask the man how he got here. Asking questions to the man, the father did not react in any way and simply stood with his head down. There was noise and commotion all around. Everyone was going about their business. But when they heard one of the employees begin to raise her voice at some man who entered their office, they began to pay attention. The girl notices that the suspicious person who came in had a very strange box in his hand. At first, she did not attach any importance to this, but the feeling that something was wrong here did not leave her. Memories of what it is began to spin in my head. Suddenly, a clear explanation comes to her mind that in front of her, is a man with an artifact capable of sucking out the souls of monsters and killing a person. She became very frightened and began shouting to her colleagues to start fighting immediately. Everyone began to summon their monsters to attack the enemy, but not yet realizing how bad things were for them, they behaved a little nervously, but confidently. Unfortunately, summoning takes some time, and at this moment, the absorber is very vulnerable. Raising his head, realizing that the enemy is now vulnerable and clearly weaker than him, he uses the absorption artifact. His gaze was very calm and cool. There was not a moment of hesitation to hurt anyone. Experiencing terrible pain from the monster's soul being pulled out, the entire department was exposed to the attack of a strong hunter, and they had no chance. The artifact could affect large groups of people and was able to activate very quickly. The merciless expression on his face, without feeling pity, watched as the lifeless bodies fell to the floor. No one managed to resist the power of the artifact and survive. Without a shadow of a doubt, the father headed through the crowd of lying corpses in search of his imprisoned comrade Kazuro, walking along the corridor past tables and offices, entering each one to find the guy. At the same time, in the interrogation room, 2 police officers were interrogating a muscled guy with no leg, trying to find out where his henchmen were and what they were doing at the scene. Aggressive cops threatened and beat him every time the guy refused to answer. Kachek sat shackled in a chair. His body was covered in bruises and abrasions. He tried to hold on and not tell anything to the mongrels of the head of the absorbers. Every time he was asked about the tomb, he answered with caustic jokes and only teased the enemy. These jokes only aggravated an already difficult situation. One of the cops decides to use a more brutal method of torture and invites the guy without a leg to tell everything. Otherwise, he will feel something unpleasant. Having refused once again, the cop presses the button and the jock experiences strong electric shocks. He is shaking, and the intense pain makes him scream. A loud cry of pain begins to be heard along the corridors, and this helps to find him faster. The father, hearing the screams, immediately went to the interrogation room and without hesitation kicked down the door. In the room, 2 policemen were very surprised and did not understand how some guy got here. The cops were very scared, and they began to suspect that the man was there for a reason. They did not understand why the alarm did not go off if the station had been infiltrated, and were thinking of attacking the man in the hat with their monsters. Entering the interrogation room, Father Kazuro greeted those present and was glad to see that the jock was still alive. His expression intimidated the enemy whenever they saw him. One of the cops recognizes the man who knocked down the door and tells his comrade that this is the fugitive from the report, for whom several squads have already been sent. All of them turned out to be dead. They became very tense and began to try to roll up their sleeve to summon the monster to fight. A quick movement of the hand with a sharp blade cuts through the air, delivering fatal blows without giving the enemy a chance to understand what happened. Frozen in one position, the cops were already beheaded. The fatal blows were inflicted by the professional blows of a very experienced and skilled warrior. Fear and horror froze on the faces of the police. Approaching the muscle man, Kazuro's father began to untie and remove the shackles from the guy's arms and legs in order to free him and take him out of the station and take him to a safe zone. The jock was surprised and a little scared that he was saved by an unknown person with such incredible fighting abilities. Such a person clearly has balls of iron if he entered the station and freed me, the jock thought. Having freed the boy, the jock began to thank the man for saving him and asking how he got here and who sent him. To which Father Kazuro replied that he was just passing by and heard terrible cries of pain and wanted to help. The father did not want to give himself away that he helped Kajuro, otherwise he would quickly be discovered. The father gave the jock a card to go to a secret place and stay there until everything calmed down. With trembling hands, Kachek takes the card and promises to do whatever the man tells him. Walking along the corridor back to the exit, the jock was frightened, realizing that the man who saved him was so strong that he could single-handedly cope with an entire area of absorbers. Kachek looked at the secret savior and was amazed at such a level of composure and calmness in front of the enemy without receiving any damage. It was clearly no coincidence that such a warrior passed by and wanted to save him. Someone definitely sent it, the jock thought. Meanwhile, Kajuro finally made it home with 2 buckets of nuts. He opened the doors and greeted Poe, saying that he had spent the day with his father and received many souvenirs from the farm. Kajuro sees himself watching the news in surprise and reacts nervously. The news said that some man in a hat came to the absorber site and mercilessly killed everyone. Anyone who can provide information about the attacker will be generously rewarded by the head of the Absorber Bureau. Kazuro noticed that the attacker looked very much like his father, but he couldn't believe it. He is an ordinary farmer who was never rude or shouted at anyone. He was kind and a little stupid in his habits. After all, he did not have a higher education. Evening came. Kazuro again moved into the forest to find a monster that would help tame the swordsman in battle. Fen, Yui, and Tsuyuki again began to follow and chase him into the dense, misty forest. Running into the middle of the forest, Kajuro notices a huge cave made by people. There were obelisks with inscriptions around. Kajuro suspected that a strong monster was located in the cave. Approaching Kazuro, he tries to catch his breath and prepare for battle. In front of the entrance, behind the obelisk, a little boy appears, watching Kajuro and not understanding what he forgot here. Kazuro notices the little monster and grabs him by the t-shirt and starts asking about the strongest monster that lives in this forest. If the boy tells where he is, then Kajuro will not kill him. The boy was scared and immediately agreed, pointing to the cave. Kazuro, not feeling sorry for the little monster, throws him to the floor and kicks him into the cave with the words, "Show your monster." The boy was weak and in great pain, but if he took Kazuro to a strong monster, he would be spared and not killed. Having flown several meters along the ground from the impact, the boy screamed, putting his hands out in front. A thick layer of dust rose behind him from sliding on the ground. The cave was abandoned long ago and covered with cobwebs. At the end of the corridor, there was a large room where 2 monsters sat and ate a corpse. They chomped loudly and did not hear the boy's screams. Severe hunger forced him to mercilessly kill a weak monster in order to restore his strength at the expense of the flesh of another monster. The boy got up and started running down the corridor towards the monsters and screaming about the guy who had come to fight them, a real living person. One of the monsters heard the boy's words, was distracted from eating his hand and raised his head, becoming interested. Another monster was eating the body and did not pay attention to the noise. The monster with long hair, who ate the hand, is surprised at such a strange act of an ordinary person and invites his lizard-shaped monster to go and have fun by killing the impudent boy who dared to distract them from the meal. Realizing that he had not eaten fresh human flesh for a long time, he was pleased with this opportunity, but he did not want to figure it out himself, since he was rather weak, and sending his servant was a very good idea. The lizard monster, rising from its knees after eating the corpse, agrees to go and kill the boy and taste fresh human flesh. Although the lizard was a servant, he was also a very strong monster, capable of fighting many absorbers. The boy was on his knees and said that the boy was standing in front of the entrance and asking the strongest monster to come out and give him a fight. The long-haired monster, holding a piece of his hand and enjoying the taste of flesh, tells his servant to go and finish this circus and then come back with the body of a fresh person. We'll give even the little one some. The lizard's ability was quite strong, since its speed could be incredible and invisible to the eye. While the master monster was eating the corpse, he was already imagining the taste of human flesh and was waiting for his servant to deal with the boy. Kajuro stood at the entrance and waited for a strong monster to come out to fight him. He hoped that the sword monster could come out long enough for Kajuro to tame the ghost. The silhouette of a monster had already begun to appear from the cave, approaching him at high speed. Kajuro, seeing the monster's aura, was a little upset, as he expected a much stronger opponent and relaxed. He began to tell the monster to go back to the cave and call the strongest monster. The monster was outraged by the impudence and reckless self-confidence that the monster immediately wanted to teach the boy a lesson and kill him in the most cruel way. Using its ability for incredible speed, the monster prepared to attack. Having gained maximum speed and used its tail to strike, the monster strained all its power into its legs, and accelerating, begins to spin for the strike. Kajuro doesn't even have time to understand something. A strong blow throws the boy a long distance. Kazuro feels severe pain in his abdomen. The internal organs were clearly damaged after such a blow, but it was not fatal. From a strong blow, Kazuro flies off and hits a tree. A thick cloud of dust rose all around, that even the birds flew away from the noise. The lizard monster was pleased and thought that the boy certainly would not have survived such a blow. Having received numerous injuries to internal organs and broken ribs, Kazuro was coughing up blood and could barely stand on his feet. The left arm was broken, but the monster swordsman did not show up. Kazuro understood that this was not enough, and it was necessary to bring the lizard so that it would finish off Kazuro. Barely breathing and holding back from the pain, Kazuro began to provoke the lizard by the fact that he had very weak blows, just like his sister, raising his right hand and showing his middle finger. The lizard monster approached the guy slowly, without fear and completely confident in his victory. With a quick movement, the lizard strikes the guy in the chest. Kajuro didn't even notice how the monster had already hit him. From deep shock, the boy did not feel pain in the first second of the blow. The lizard monster with its blow slammed Kajuro into a tree trunk, using a very strong and fast blow. The guy felt his body being nailed to a tree at great speed, and severe pain ran through his body. The monster's hand pierced the guy's chest and tore everything inside. Kajuro immediately began to choke from the amount of blood entering his mouth. His eyes began to roll back. This was definitely a fatal blow. 3 classmates spying on Kazuro see how the boy was severely injured and stood, motionless, pressed against a tree trunk. The monster, without removing his hand, said that the guy had come here in vain, unless, of course, he wanted to commit suicide. The guys were shocked by what they saw and scared. They didn't understand why the guy gave in to the monster so easily without fighting it with his monster abilities. Yui was shocked and could not believe that someone who interested her father so much could die so easily. Suddenly, Kazuro's heart begins to glow blue and beat. The guy begins to come to life, and the mana of the sword monster begins to leave his body, restoring the guy. A strong cry of pain excited the guys watching the guy being beaten. The lizard monster was surprised that the boy did not die with a hole in his chest and began to get nervous. The swordsman's monster captured the guy's body, turning his arms into bone. The guy's head was lowered and did not yet understand what was happening. Placing his bone hand on the hand of the lizard monster, Kazuro sighed and said, "Thank you."